Okay, the last section of this chapter deals with the pleura. Let's remind ourselves that if this is the lung, they're attached to the lung is something called the visceral pleura. And this then folds over, and when it folds over, it attaches to the chest wall, and here we call it the parietal pleura. So again, there's a parietal pleura and a visceral pleura. In between that is the pleural space. Now remember that both the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura are lined by mesothelial cells. The mesothelial cells produce a fluid that helps to lubricate the pleural space to facilitate the movement of the lung against the chest wall. The first disorder is called a pneumothorax. This is where there's accumulation of air in the pleural space. One type of pneumothorax is a spontaneous pneumothorax. This is usually due to rupture of an emphysematous bleb, classically seen in young adults. This results in collapse of a portion of the lung, with the trachea shifting to the side of the collapse. Here's a perfect picture that illustrates that. This is the normal lung on this side, and you can see that on this particular side the lung has actually collapsed and the thorax is full of air, hence the term pneumothorax. Now a tension pneumothorax arises with a penetrating chest wall injury, and this is a medical emergency. The idea here is the following. So imagine that if this is the lung, and of course the lung has a pleura attached to it, and now we've got the chest wall out here. If the patient were to get an injury, that would open the chest wall so that when the patient breathed in, air could come into the pleural space, but when they breathe out, air cannot escape. Then every time they breathe in, they'd essentially be putting air into the pleural space as if they were pumping air into a basketball. So air would continue to enter, which would eventually compress this lung down, and as it compressed this lung down, the pressure would also push the trachea to the opposite side. This is a medical emergency because this high tension within the thorax can also create pressure on the heart and other vital structures, and that's called the tension pneumothorax, and the way by which it's relieved is putting in a chest tube, which then allows the air to drain out from this pleural space. The final lesion of the pleura is called mesothelioma. You've heard about it previously in these discussions. This is a malignant neoplasm of mesothelial cells, again highly associated with exposure to asbestos. It presents with recurrent pleural effusions. That makes sense because the mesothelial cells normally make fluid, which lubricates the pleural space, and so the tumor will also make fluid producing recurrent pleural effusions. Also there's dyspnea and chest pain. And then the tumor classically encases the lung the same way that the mesothelium, the normal mesothelium, normally surrounds the lung. And so here's a picture. This is the normal lung here, and you can see that there's this tumor which is massively encasing the lung, and this is a classic picture of a mesothelioma. And that concludes this section and the chapter.